Before dawn on the 25th of July, 1953, a strange machine was crawling through the Bohemian forest toward the most heavily guarded border in Europe. From a distance, it looked like an armored vehicle of the Czechoslovak army out on night maneuvers. Gray-green panels, 2 men in soldiers' caps riding up top in plain view. Branches lashed across the hull. It moved slowly, deliberately, the way a military vehicle moves when nobody is in a hurry and nobody is afraid. It was a fake. Every panel of it had been cut by hand in a backyard garage. The armor was salvaged. The man at the controls was not a soldier. He was a mechanic. And crammed into the dark hull behind him were his wife, his 2 young children, and 4 other people betting their lives on a single idea. The idea was almost insulting in its simplicity. Guards do not stop what looks like their own army. Ahead lay the wall that had killed people for far less than this. Rows of barbed wire, watchtowers, patrols with orders to shoot. Somewhere up the road, a guard was already watching the machine come on. Inside the hull, the children had been told to stay silent. Years of patient, secret work had come down to the next few minutes and to a single guard's curiosity. Here's the question the whole night turned on. Can a fake built in a garage fool men who see the real thing every single day? To understand how a homemade tank ended up rolling toward the Iron Curtain with 8 people inside, you have to go back to the empty workshop where it started. And first, you have to understand the wall it was about to hit. By 1953, the border between Czechoslovakia and West Germany was not a line on a map. It was a system designed to make leaving impossible. After the communist takeover in 1948, the new government sealed the western frontier. The open countryside that had let people drift across for centuries was turned into a killing ground. Rows of barbed wire, watchtowers along the line, floodlights, patrols with dogs. In stretches, the wire carried high voltage, and the ground in front of it was mined. Behind all of it sat a forbidden zone that ordinary citizens could not even enter without papers. The barriers did not appear all at once. Through the early 1950s, the regime kept thickening them, adding wire, clearing strips of bare ground so that anyone crossing would be left exposed, lengthening the reach of the towers. Year by year, the frontier grew harder to beat. Whatever opening had existed when the first wire went up was smaller now and closing. By some accounts, around 20,000 soldiers guarded this frontier, strung along hundreds of miles of wire. The point of all that steel was not only to keep people in, it was to make the attempt itself feel insane. People still tried. Most who attempted an Iron Curtain escape did it the obvious way, on foot, at night, through the trees, with wire cutters and forged papers and luck. To the regime, leaving was not a personal choice. It was treason, and it was treated that way. Many were caught. Many were shot. The frontier was engineered so that the few who got through would be the rare exception that proved the rule. So put yourself on that border in 1953. You are a guard. Your job is to watch for movement in the dark. A figure crouching at the wire. A flashlight. A cut fence. Everything you are trained to stop is small, quiet, and trying hard not to be seen. You are not trained to stop a tank. A tank belongs to your own side. You would not stop to inspect it. You would assume that someone above you already had. That gap between what the guards watched for and what was about to drive straight at them was the only opening in the entire system, and one man had spent years thinking about it. The real disguise was never going to be the metal. It was going to be the assumption. He was a mechanic with a backyard, a wrecked engine, and a plan that should not have worked. This is how he built it. Václav Uhlík was a mechanic in western Bohemia. near the town of Line. He had survived a wartime concentration camp, and by several accounts, he had been part of the Czech resistance. After 1948, he watched the new government slowly swallow his auto repair shop. A man who had outlived one brutal system was being quietly erased by the next. He had no army behind him, no money, no special access. What he had was a garage, a gift for fixing engines, and patience. In his backyard sat the rusted wreck of a Second World War armored vehicle. By most accounts, it was a Saurer artillery tractor, a wheel and track machine the German army had once used. Most people would have seen scrap. Uhlík saw a way out. For years, while he worked, he listened to Radio Free Europe, the Western broadcasts the regime was busy jamming. The broadcasts gave him hope. The work gave him patience. He rebuilt the wreck in plain sight, which was the hardest place to hide anything. Neighbors could see a man tinkering with an old machine. When he bought parts, he told people they were for his lumber machine, a vehicle for hauling timber. Hand-cut sheet metal panels went on one at a time. He shaped armor out of salvage and painted it the gray-green of the army. Every panel was cut and fitted by hand. No plans, no factory, no second chance on a weld. And every day the machine sat in that yard was another day a neighbor or a patrol might wonder why a mechanic needed armor plate. In the autumn of 1952, they tried it. The whole group climbed in and drove for the border and got within about 10 miles before the engine simply gave out. The machine could not pull its own weight. They turned around and drove home in the dark, undiscovered, which was its own small miracle. One of the men, a former soldier, even slipped a borrowed army gun back where he had taken it. After that, Uhlík rebuilt almost everything. He found a stronger engine, and he reinforced the armor. And here's how he tested it. They fired a revolver at the original plates. The bullet went straight through, so they made them thicker. New tires went on, new panels. The fake now had to survive not just a glance, but possibly gunfire. Finding a stronger engine was its own quiet danger. A mechanic asking around for a heavy motor in a town where everyone watched everyone had to have a reason ready every single time. And the group grew. His wife, Marta, their 2 young children, Josef Pisarek, a farmer the regime had jailed as an enemy of the people after seizing his land, Walter Hora, a former soldier, Hora's army friend, a tailor named Krajcik, and Libus Hrodkova, a young woman who had tried again and again to reach her American husband across the border and failed every time. 8 people, 1 machine welded together from scrap. If it failed at the wire, it would not be one death, it would be all of them. By the summer of 1953, the lumber machine was ready. What it had to do next, it could only do once. They left in the small hours after midnight on the 25th of July, 1953. The plan had been to roll out at midnight, but mounting the steel plates took longer than expected, and there were belongings to pack. So it was later than they wanted when the machine finally pulled out of the workshop. Branches were lashed across the hull. 2 of the men rode up top in soldiers' caps, not hiding, but performing. The rest crouched in the cramped, dark interior with the children. From any distance, in the half-light, it read as exactly what it was pretending to be: an army vehicle, out where army vehicles belonged. Then they drove. For something like 40 miles. The machine ground its way through the Bohemian forest toward the frontier, running on its wheels along the roads, slow and unhurried. When the ground turned rough, the design let it drop down onto its tracks. And here's the part that is almost funny. If you set the stakes aside for a second, nobody stopped them. Patrols saw the machine. Guards saw it, and not one of them challenged it, because what they saw was their own side, out on exercise, exactly where it was supposed to be. The fake was not fooling anyone into believing it was a fearsome tank. It was simply not worth a second look. That was the whole trick. Think about that for a moment. The hardest part of the most dangerous border crossing in Europe was not getting through the wire. It was driving slowly enough, calmly enough, that nobody thought to look twice. As the sky began to gray, they reached the border zone near the West German town of Waldmünchen. Close to the line, Uhlík stopped. He raised the wheels and dropped the machine onto its tracks for what was coming. Ahead lay the frontier itself. The wire, the barriers, a tank trap, and a guard. And then came the strangest beat in the whole story. A lone guard, seeing what looked like an army vehicle rolling up, waved them out of the tank trap and into a safe lane. The system did not just fail to stop them. For one moment, it helped them along. The guard had no reason to think otherwise. Nothing about the machine said to run. Everything about it said routine. Uhlík was now closer to the wire than he had ever been. Years of work behind him. A dead engine made whole. Hand-cut panels bolted on by hand. 8 people in the dark at his back. One guard waved him forward. Beyond that guard, an open lane. And beside it, 3 rows of barbed wire and the wooden barriers behind them. And past all of it, West Germany. He did not take the lane. There was no signal, no countdown, nothing to warn the people braced in the dark behind them. He turned the machine at the wire and opened the engine all the way up. It lunged off the road and into the barrier. The engine roared. It tore through the first row of wire, then the second, then the third, ripping the wooden barricades into splinters. Wires screamed against the hull. The whole machine shuddered and kept going. According to the report Time magazine ran that August, the border guards stood by, stunned, mouths open, as the machine snorted through the wire. Not one of them managed a shot. Some of those guards, by later accounts, were sent to prison for letting it happen. And then the machine was through, on the other side, driving. Uhlík kept going, some 20 miles into West Germany, until he met a United States Army patrol. Inside the hull was the group's quiet advantage for this exact moment. Libus Hrankova spoke fluent English and was married to an American citizen. They asked for asylum. They were taken to the town of Cham, treated as refugees, and questioned by American counterintelligence. A wall that thousands of men guarded had just been beaten by a machine welded together in a backyard. Not because it was a better tank, because it looked too ordinary to bother with. The real disguise had never been the metal. It was the assumption that nobody would dare. But the strangest part of the story was still ahead, because the West was about to turn this fake into something it had never been built to be. Asylum was granted to all 8. And then the Western press got hold of the story, and the homemade machine got a new name, the Freedom Tank. It was exactly the story the West wanted in 1953. The escape was folded into the crusade for freedom, the fundraising campaign behind Radio Free Europe, the same broadcasts Uhlík had listened to for years in his garage. A man who had taken hope from those broadcasts was now being used to raise money for them. In December 1953, the group flew to New York. They were settled in Springfield, Massachusetts. They appeared on television. The Uhlík family posed for photographs on top of their machine alongside Ed Sullivan, the biggest variety show host in America. In January 1954, the Freedom Tank was driven in a parade through New York. It did not finish. First a radiator leak, which Uhlík and Hora patched in the street to the pop of flashbulbs. Then the engine quit altogether, and the machine had to be towed off the streets of Manhattan. It had crossed the most guarded border in Europe. It could not cross the Bronx. The story, by then, was far bigger than the machine, and everyone involved seemed to know it. The 8 went their separate ways, and by most accounts, never saw one another again. Uhlík eventually settled in Fresno, California, worked as a driver, had 2 more children, and died in 1977. Libus Hronkova reunited with her husband in Iowa. Of all the adults who climbed into that machine, she was the only one who lived long enough to see the Iron Curtain finally come down. She died in 2012. And the machine itself? For decades, it stood on display at the Henry Ford Museum in Michigan, a curiosity behind a rope. Its hand-cut panels still bolted exactly where Uhlík had fitted them. Later, it was sold, passing out of the museum and into private hands, where it remains, kept by a collector in Michigan, far from the forest it once crawled through. Back in Prague, in a police archive, there is a photograph of the gap it tore in the wire. It sits in an album the border guards themselves assembled, a catalog of the ways people beat their system. They titled it, "Without a Trace of Irony, the Tactic of the Enemy." So, back to the question from that gray morning at the wire. Can a fake built in a garage fool men who see the real thing every day? The answer is bolted together and sitting in a shed in Michigan, decades after the border it beat was tore down. A homemade machine that was never a real tank, and never needed to be. It only had to look like it belonged. If you like stories of ordinary people who found the one crack in an impossible system, stay with the channel. There are plenty more where this came from.